Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories. Today I have, of course, another incredible surviving sibling with me. Her name is Kourtney. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Maya. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you too. And like I say on every episode, excited, but of course it's bittersweet how we all meet each other. But I'm really interested in telling your story, hearing more about your story and your sister, Kristi, because it's a story of losing your sister, but it's also a story of kind of this lifelong journey that Kristi went on, and you're active in this community too. I'm just going to dive right in here, Kourtney. Tell us a little bit about your sister, your relationship, your family dynamics, and again, we're going to talk about some pretty interesting topics today.
Okay, so there are 5 of us in our family. I am the baby. Kristi was the middle child. There, like I said, my brothers and sisters are all really close in age to each other. I was 7 years behind everybody else. They are all 7 to 13 years older than me. So I was the baby. So I was born into our family, and Kristi was already having issues. Kristi was born with Rett syndrome, which is a rare neurological disorder that affects mostly girls. There are boys that have Rett syndrome, but it is affecting mostly girls. And what happens is the girls are and boys are normally born typical. So 10 toes, 10 fingers, healthy, everything like that. And then between the ages of 6 and 18 months, they lose all their skills. It was not actually diagnosed in the United States until 1986 for the first time.
Wow.
So we actually did not know what Kristi had for the first 21 years of her life. And back in when she was born in 1965, they didn't have the programs and stuff like she had. So she was actually already in a group home, because that was what my parents were told, was put her in a home and kind of forget about her, which my parents didn't, but she was already in a home by the time I was born. So I grew up not knowing a life different than I had a sister who didn't live at home. I was actually baptized at her home because my mom was pregnant with me. So the kids would run up and will come up to her and touch her belly and stuff. So my parents actually had me baptized at her home. So again, I didn't know any differently. Kristi was a part of our life. I knew I had the sister who didn't talk. She had seizures. She always clasped her hands, which is very common. There's always some kind of a stereopathy with the hands with our girls. And that was just life. That was who we were. My brother and sister, who were older than Kristi, went through the regression. They saw the regression. They saw her lose her skills and stuff like that. And then the one who was born right after her was the one she saw, like, when everything was going on with the seizures, when the seizures really started very badly. Again, it was just something I grew into. The big joke was the first day of kindergarten was the day that I realized my family wasn't normal, because we were sitting in circle time as you do in kindergarten. And the teacher was Mrs. Julius. I'll never forget her, said, "Oh, let's talk about our families." And I'm Barnum. So I have 5 brothers and sisters, and I have a sister who doesn't live at home and she doesn't talk and she sometimes doesn't walk and she has really bad shaky seizures. And everybody else went, and nobody else talked about their sister that was like this. And I was like, wait a second. And so I looked at my teacher and I'm like, and she's, "Honey, your family's special. You know, you have a sister who has special needs or a disability." And so I went home and I got off the bus and I said, "Okay, Mommy, we have to go pick up Kristi." And she said, "Why do we have to go pick up Kristi?" I said, "I'm going to take her for show and tell tomorrow."
Oh my gosh.
And my mother said, "We're not taking your sister to school for show and tell." But that was the day that I realized this was not normal. This was not
Right.
how life was supposed to be. I was always how do I even explain it? I was always with Kristi, even though she didn't live at home. Because I was so much younger than everybody else, I was always the one going to the doctor's appointments with my mom, because she would still go to doctor's appointments and do all that stuff with Kristi when she needed to. So I was the one who would go with her. I would go when we moved her actually to a home that was a little bit farther from our house because of necessity. It was a better home for Kristi. It had more options, it had more staff and better things for her. We were up there every other weekend. I didn't know a life without my sister who was special. We did not know she was considered severely, profoundly mentally retarded with a severe seizure disorder was her diagnosis. We went through life with her at when she turned 18. This is a completely inappropriate story, but it's funny as all get out. My mom made sure all the kids were to go see her for her 18th birthday. By this time, my parents had divorced. And so we go up there, and there's 4 girls and 1 boy. And my brother loves to tease the daylights out of us.
Of
If he's
course.
not teasing you, yeah,
Yeah.
something's wrong. So we're at the restaurant. We have finished dinner. We're eating ice cream. And my brother looks at Christy and he's, okay, you're 18 years old. It's time to get off the drugs, get off of the government assistance, stop relying on mom and dad, and get a
My
freaking
gosh.
job.
Oh my gosh.
And everybody in the restaurant, because they can't see Christy at this point, are looking at us like we are the devil. My sister is sitting there laughing hysterically. And that was when I was like, wait a second, Christy's in there. Like she
Mhm.
understands because all I had heard was that she was like a baby and that she didn't understand and that she was like a 9 to 12-month old. And I'm like, babies don't laugh
Not
sarcasm.
that joke.
And she
No.
was laughing.
Yeah.
But there was also I was scared to death of my 10th birthday. I didn't want my 10th birthday. Christy was born July 15th. I was born August 3rd. So our birthdays were close to each other. But I had heard my whole life growing up that she was going to die by her 20th birthday. And so I didn't want my 10th birthday to come. I didn't want to celebrate because Christy was going to be dead. I don't even know how to describe it. We all adored Christy. All the siblings adored Christy. I will say it, I was the one who we had this relationship that I can't describe. We never spoke a word, but I could understand everything she was saying. I understood what she needed. Like we were always just she made me feel like I was the best person in the world, no matter what. And fast forward, I went to school. I wanted to be a speech therapist because I wanted to work with kids who couldn't talk. I wanted
Yeah.
to work with devices and stuff like that. Ended up not doing that because they don't do devices until later. So I got my teaching degree and taught special ed in with Christy in my head at all times
Of
going,
course.
if
How could this
somebody
not be your inspiration? Of course.
right.
Yeah.
If somebody would have taught her, if somebody would have done something with her, where would she be? So that was my attitude. And then now I actually work with girls with Rett and teach them.
No,
Yeah,
that's
and
awesome.
we got her diagnosis when she was 21. Her neurologist who followed her. We actually stayed in touch with him until the day he died when he was in his 90s. He was the one who went to a conference over in Europe, and there was a man standing there with a girl that could have been Christie's spitting image with the same mannerisms and stuff. And he walked up to him and he was like, "Sir, I need to ask you, what is your daughter? What does she have?" And the guy actually was Andreas Rett, which is the doctor who discovered Rett syndrome, and he said she has Rett syndrome and we're introducing it today. And so Dr. Ivan called us and he said, "Hey, I know what Christy has." And we're like, "What do you mean?" And she has Rett syndrome. We're like, "Okay, what does that mean?" He goes, "I don't know, but we have a name for it." So we got the diagnosis of Rett syndrome when she was 21, and it was confirmed in 99 when they found it's an actual genetic mutation on a protein of the MECP2 gene. And so they were able to figure out where this mutation is. And so in 1999, we got confirmation that was what she had, which it was obvious, but yeah,
Wow, that's quite a story. Okay, Courtney, let's unpack this a little bit. So Dr. Rett, who is like the found obviously we don't create these things, but he's the one that discovered what Rett syndrome is.
it
And
was his patient and he was
got
introducing
it.
Rett syndrome that day at the
Wow.
conference and Dr. Ivan just happened to be there.
Meant to be. Meant to
Yes.
be. It's like in these stories, I always have chill moments. That's a chill moment. And wow, that's so fascinating. So again, you made it to your 10th birthday, so you were good. So when you were 11 and she was 21, 20 can you imagine 21 years? Wow, and
Yeah.
just not knowing or being honestly, being misdiagnosed because
Yeah.
of not having that knowledge. So, how did things change for you guys, for you, for Christy? once having that, I'm sure there were so many emotions. Oh my gosh, relief because there's a name for this. There's an understanding about it, but also I'm sure there's that frustration. I'm sure there's so many emotions going on when that happened, right?
There definitely was. I think once we passed 20 and she survived and she wasn't dead, we decided we were gonna I've never trusted doctors, I'm going to be very honest, and now I really like after that, I was like, I don't listen to doctors because we were always fighting for with doctors about Rhett and what was going on and everything, especially as she got older too, because again, there wasn't a lot of we were in a chasm when she was little and we were in a chasm when she was older because we didn't have many girls who survived when she did. She actually survived with Rett syndrome until she was 51, which was very unheard of. When we would go to places, people be like, "Oh my god, she's 50. Wait, she's 50? Holy shit." Yeah, she's 50. So it changed things in that we finally had other people we could talk to. I met my first other Rett family when I was in my 20s, which it was so amazing to meet somebody else who understood because I would go and talk to other siblings who had Down syndrome or not even autism really at that point, but just like Down syndrome or other things. There was some similarities, but there was also a lot of differences. So it was so nice to have other families who understood Rett and
Yeah.
this world that we're living in because it really is one of the biggest things with Rett syndrome, and I'm going to say this really loud, is our girls and boys are in there. They are literally trapped in their bodies. And so they have not, everybody always assumed that it was an intellectual disability. And what we are finding is that it is not an intellectual disability, it is a neurological and physical disability. But there's that assumption. And so to meet other families that understood that, wait a second, these girls are in here and they're really funny and they're really goofy and they're really sarcastic and feisty and everything else was amazing. I was in my late 20s when I got to meet another sib who had a sister that was the sister who was typical was my age, and it was like, oh my god, to be able to talk to somebody else.
What a moment.
And
Yeah.
it just evolved and now it has completely, there's so much, god, there's so much change and growth in the area of Rett with medication. And like I said, in 99, they figured out the gene. In 2000, they actually reversed it in mice models. And then we just last year, they released the first treatment for Rett syndrome. It's not a cure, but it's a treatment. And they're actually in trials for genetic, I don't want to mess it up, but actual like genetic, changing the genetics and possibly reversing most of the effects of Rett syndrome.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. If you've lost a sibling, trust me, I know exactly how you feel. I'm Maya. I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast, but I'm also the founder of Surviving Siblings Support. I know that going through this experience is extremely difficult, whether you've lost a brother like me, a sister, or perhaps more than one sibling. Trust me, we know exactly how you feel. So that's why I started our Patreon account. You can click below to find out more about our Patreon. If you join our Patreon group, it'll give you just a little bit of extra support that you need along your journey as a bereaved sibling, or as we like to call it, a surviving sibling. We offer monthly support groups. We offer a free copy of our grief guide that is actually found on Amazon. It's called the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. We also offer direct messaging to our community and to me for extra support. And we have incredible events. We have workshops throughout the year that you'll get access to, and you'll also have access to our summit that happens annually. And so much more as you'll connect with a community of surviving siblings that understand the journey of losing a sibling. You can click below to join us today and also check out some additional VIP features that we offer. I hope to see you in the group, and until then, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings. Wow, this is what a time to be talking about this, Kourtney. Oh my gosh, right? It's like
I
right
know.
on time that we're talking about this. Like it's a perfect obviously anything like Rett syndrome or anything that you guys have gone through. There's always a time and a place to talk about it, but this feels like it's having a moment. It's okay,
Mhm.
we're finally making some progress and I'm sure, you being in the field and working with this, it must be so amazing to watch that and honor your sister with which of course we're
Yeah.
going to continue to talk about. But I'm curious too with Kristi. So when she got the diagnosis, and there was like, again, I get everything that you're saying though too, because I'm sure you were just thrown into like this world where all these different siblings that they were like, okay, if you have XYZ, all of you guys can relate. And that's not the case. I think you make a
Right.
really great point with that because there's different challenges with different things that you go through, right? And I think what a moment when they realized Rett syndrome, it's neurological, it's very physical. But I guess a question I have so many questions for you, but one question I would ask is, does it mean that they were telling you guys that she was like a baby, basically, a
Mhm.
child, but her brain and her was maturing the whole time. So that was
Mhm.
really inaccurate. So that's a
Yeah.
big fact I think to know about Rett syndrome is
Yeah.
while there's a lot of physical and neurological things happening that I'm sure are so challenging and heartbreaking to watch, they are maturing mentally
Mhm.
and
They're taking in everything that goes on
right,
around them. They are the with the girls and boys I work with now. Like I said, I actually teach. I do private clients and I teach them how to communicate using an eye gaze device. They use their eyes to talk, and I am teaching my girls how to read and write. And they are. We have a young lady who's on our client list who passed the state reading test in Texas. I have girls sitting in regular ed classrooms learning and growing. And yeah, it's really amazing because everybody discounts them because they're in a wheelchair and their hands and their mouth do not work. So
right.
there is no intelligence test that is even valid for our girls and boys. And so when people are like, oh, they're intellectually disabled, I'm like, oh, and what test did you use?
Mhm.
Because there is no test. So yeah, it's really, like I said, Kristi was my person. She was my everything. I adore her to this day. She was my person. If she didn't like you, you were out of my life.
Yeah.
Literally, because she could pick up on those things. I did not listen one time. That would be my ex-husband.
Sorry, Kristi.
The best
Right,
part was she got to be in my wedding and she had an absolute blast being in my wedding and everything. But yeah, she never liked him and gave him dirty looks during the whole wedding. But yeah, she
oh
did
my
not like.
gosh.
But Kristi was my person, and
Yeah.
I started helping my mom with caregiving and going to her meetings and going to the doctor's appointments because my mom was getting older and had health problems herself. When I was 21, I started doing all, like I said, meetings for her home, going to doctor's appointments, hospital stays. I did all of that stuff. So I wasn't just her sister, I was also her caregiver, which changed the dynamics between myself, my siblings, my mom. So it there was a lot of dynamics going on in that respect too.
Yeah, I'm really glad you touched on this because I wanted to shift into this as well. Perfect timing. So, yeah, I'm sure that changed so much because you're from a big family. 5 is considered big. I'm from 4. That's considered big now. People are like, "Oh my gosh, you want more than 1 or 2 kids?" That was normal, but now it's a big family, and so there's just so many dynamics between siblings, and so that's one thing that stands out to me in your story and your relationship with Kristi is that I understand why you are like, "This is my person," you feel so close to her because you also have this dynamic of being a caregiver, and I think that
Right.
shifts so much in so many stories that I've heard about that, so I'm really glad we're chatting about that, and I think what kind of advice would you give to siblings listening to this, Kourtney, about when you shift into kind of that caregiver role as we're sharing this story? Because I think that's different, right? I think that's
It is.
something that not all of us experience in the sibling loss journey, and I think being a caregiver, it's it's a shift. So I'd love if you could talk about that for a few moments if you don't mind and give some advice and I think like we always say hindsight's 2020, so we can always look back and be like I wish I did this or that, but I feel like you're carrying her legacy so beautifully as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind touching on that, I think that'd be great.
My biggest advice would be to stand up for yourself and ask for I never learned how to ask for help. It was not something that was part of our family dynamic. We didn't ask for help. There was a lot of times my how do I say this nicely? I love my siblings. I adore my siblings, but there became a big divide between myself and my siblings because I was now Kristi's caregiver and we moved her like I was the one flying. When we first moved to Florida, we actually kept Kristi up in Ohio
Interesting.
because of the fact that we moved down here. We went and looked at homes. I looked at my mother and I said, I would not put a dog in a home down here. Like they were disgusting. So we kept Kristi up there and we did reverse. Like we were up there all the time. My mom was flying up. And then when I was old enough, I started doing the winter visits my mom couldn't do them. So I was flying up there all the time to see Kristi and I would see all my other siblings while I was up there. Once we moved Kristi down here because she came off of her seizure meds and she really understood what was going on and was having a really hard time being away from us. We moved her to a home down here that was things had gotten a little bit better. I was close enough that I was always there and I was the bitchy sister who, God forbid, you messed with my sister, you were in big trouble. So we moved her down here and they stopped seeing her. Like they didn't come to Florida. My mom and stepdad moved us to Florida. There became a big chasm between them and me because I
Yeah.
was down away. I had a very different life. I never told them like how bad it was. My mother also had a mental illness, undiagnosed. We didn't talk about when things were hard or when things were, and my mother never got along with all of us at the same time. So it made things
Oh,
very,
Kourtney, you are preaching to the choir here. I get that. It creates a lot of division. It creates we could do a whole show on that, but it
yeah,
creates a lot of division. So you're giving great
yeah,
insight as to why this kind of evolved that way, and I connect with that personally. Those of you who have listened to my story know that too, because again, when you have these kind of larger families and maybe a mother who's not functioning at a certain level with certain things emotionally, there's division can be a positive thing for them. It is never a positive thing
right.
because then they're having relationships and whoever's wanting to have the type of relationship that they want at that time, that's who they're engaging with. So I
Right.
follow you, Kourtney.
Right.
Yeah, I get it.
And it left a lot of taking care of Kristi and going through the hard things by myself.
Mhm.
My mom used Kristi as a pawn with us. I'm going to be very honest. She used Kristi as a pawn. So if I wasn't doing something she liked, she would threaten to take Kristi. Like she would threaten to cut off my visits with Kristi. Now, mind you, I saw Kristi, my mom and I took turns. I would go over to her home whenever I felt like it just to say, Hi, I'm here. Are you taking care of my sister correctly? But and then she would go home on the other weekend. She would go to my mom's. But if I did something my mom didn't like, she would be like, Okay, you can't see Kristi this weekend, to the point that I was getting a lawyer because my mom threatened because my other sister Carrie came down to visit and we didn't tell mom that she was coming. And so my mother threatened to stop all contact with me with Kristi. And you can do whatever you want to me, but don't don't take my sister. But she was my girl. Yeah, so it really created a lot of chasm. And even when she died, and even still, I love them. They don't talk about Kristi, which I want to talk about Kristi, which I get. They're grieving in their own way. And I'm learning that now. At first, I was very angry with them because they were like, oh, you were too involved. You couldn't. And I'm like, who else was going to take care of her?
Mhm.
Mom couldn't do it. But now I'm realizing that's their way of grieving and that's okay. And there was a reason that I was here and doing the things I needed to do by myself. So if that makes sense, like I'm learning how to grow from that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Kourtney, totally. Totally makes sense. And I share this a lot too, that I was so angry and so judgmental of my other siblings. I have two surviving sisters and judgmental of both of my parents and then anybody else that I thought should be grieving a certain way. And I'm sure you would agree. I don't believe that time heals all wounds, but I do believe that time helps you heal. And what
Yes,
it's different. People are like, "Oh, that's semantics." I'm like, "It's not because
it's not.
time helps you learn how to grieve and it helps you step back a little bit and go, okay, I need to not be misjudgy over here and realize that they're grieving in their own way. And as long as it's not unhealthy, I have to respect that. And if they're on a
Right,
totally different timeline than me, or they grieve by not talking about it, but in the throes of it, and when you're super close to that sibling, you're like, everybody should feel exactly how I feel. And why are you not processing this like me? I get it. I totally get it.
right.
And I know a lot of you guys listening get it too. Yeah,
And
completely.
like I said, my mom played us against each other, so there was a lot of that built into it. So, for example,
Yeah.
there was a couple times that we've almost lost Christy. In 2000, I'm looking at my sorry, 2013, we almost lost her. Like, it was bad, and it was at
What
Thanksgiving.
was happening, Courtney? Was she having seizures? Like, what was bringing up? Because she lived quite a long life, like you
She did live.
mentioned.
She did.
Looking at the typical lifespan for Rett syndrome, now
Right.
let's check off the list now that we know what the heck was going on, right? And
Right.
then understanding what the typical lifespan is and understanding without having any, like, true medication or anything out that's now coming out, thank goodness, but 51 is quite a long time to
Right.
live as you're teaching me about this, but what ended up happening in 2013, and then, of course, we'll get into what actually happened, but what happened that it was such a close call? What goes on? Yeah.
She would have UTIs and she would have kidney stones on a pretty constant basis. She was mobile, she would walk with assistance, especially at the end, but not getting enough fluid and things like that, she would end up with kidney stones. She ended up being septic. When I got to the hospital that night, her blood pressure, I think, was like 80 over 40. She was non-responsive. It was the scariest. And I was trying to my mom was driving up from they were living in Punta Gorda at the time, about 2 hours away. So I was trying to get to the hospital, make sure everything, trying to answer questions for the doctors. And in the meantime, this was over Thanksgiving week as well, too. Which was funny that, as you'll hear later, Thanksgiving was a suck time for me. I was also graduating with my master's degree, and my thesis was due right after Thanksgiving.
Mm.
And so I'm in the hospital trying to deal with Kristi and all of the drama and mom and everything else, and my sister possibly dying, and then, "Oh, wait, I have a thesis that I've gotta do because 'cause I've gotta graduate." They ended up putting a NG tube in her to help her with her feeding because she wasn't eating or anything at that point, which ended up helping, but it caused a huge rift between myself and my mom. Things were already on the kind of outs, but that kind of cemented it because she had always told me that we wouldn't do anything. We had agreed that as a family that if things happened, we would not do heroic measures, that we wouldn't push Christie's body to the limits. And so we decided we were not going to do the tube, that we were not going to do the NG tube. I had a prior commitment that Friday that I couldn't, like, I would have lost a lot of money if I didn't go. So I went, and my mother proceeded to call all of my siblings and ask them what their opinion was on the NG tube. They all said, "Mom, if you think it's okay, you should do it." And so I came back to Kristi with an NG tube in her thing. Looking back, I'm thrilled because we had her for another 3 years. But it was one of those things where I called my siblings after that and I said, "Hey, hi, I'm the one who kind of deals with all this. You all are up there living your life, and that's great." My sister Carrie had come down to help. I said, "But here's the deal. When Kristi dies, because it's going to happen, you all get mom. I'm done." Like, and they all laughed at me, and I was like, "No, I'm dead serious. She's your
This
response.
is not a joke, folks. This is for real. Yeah.
She's your responsibility." So
Mhm.
yeah, that was when her body really started to take a that kind of just she kept having issues, kept having kidney stones, kept having things, so it was a touch and go for, like, the next 3 years.
So educate us on this, Courtney. So with getting kidney stones, and all of us gals, some of the guys too, if you've ever had a UTI, that's enough for me. Ouch,
Yeah.
ouch, ouch, ouch. I've had a kidney infection, UTI. Yeah, they're not fun. We know that. So
Right.
is this something that happens with Rett syndrome though? Is this specific, or was she just not getting enough hydration? What?
And
Why? Yeah.
it's hereditary in our family. The
Okay.
kidney stones are hereditary in our family, and then the lack of hydration because, of course, she couldn't get up and walk and go get herself a drink. She was reliant. One of the issues with Rett syndrome is that you are reliant on other people for
Yep.
pretty much everything. So she was reliant on the people who were taking care of her to make sure she was getting enough to drink and things like that. It was a combination. And then because she's sedentary because she doesn't move a lot and stuff like that, those things are exasperated. A lot of the things that do take our girls, we have girls dying, unfortunately, at different ages. I've had a client as young as 7 die. I've had girls who are in their 30s. Like, it can be seizures, it can be breath. Their body doesn't breathe for them automatically like ours does. There will be times where their breath, it can be seizures, it can be just a long, what's called long QT, which is something with the heart. It can be just they go to sleep one night and don't wake up.
I feel like a lot of people who have an anticipatory losses are going to connect with your story and
Yeah.
Kristi's story so deeply, Kourtney, because it feels like, gosh, this was ingrained in you as a child.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't want my 10th birthday, which is usually a really fun birthday for kids, right? Because you're
Right.
double digits and it's like a fun one, right? When you're young, all your birthdays are fun. But you
Right.
have had this quite a long anticipatory, and we often talk about like getting the call here. And of course, we're gonna get to the part, of course, where Kristi passes. But for you, it's like all these calls. That's what I've noticed with anticipatory losses. And especially when you're dealing with something like Rett syndrome, you're always living in that moment of this can happen at any time. This can
Yeah.
happen at any time. And that's such a heavy thing
Right.
to carry for most of your life. You've carried that,
Yeah.
right? It's,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's a
you
lot.
realize now, like I'm realizing now, I'm actually in therapy and trauma therapy because I do have some of that complex post traumatic, because you're living, when you're in it, you don't realize it. You're in constant fight or flight. You're in constant chronic stress. And it's when you come out of it, and I'm almost 8 years out, that it's really, I'm feeling it now. My body has, I'm feeling all of the everything of carrying that for so many years. And again, as I tell everybody, I would not change Kristi for the world. I would not change my life with her. You don't realize the toll it takes
Yep.
until you're done with it. And then you're
Yeah.
like, holy shit.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask you that because it's a lot, and all of the losses we talk about on the show are a lot, but I feel like it's important to talk about things that are very specific with the type of
Mhm.
loss because I think bringing light to that and just allowing grace for people to process because like you said you're almost 8 years out just like me. We're on the same time here.
Yeah.
But I'm still processing from the things that I went through, so I totally get it. But what stands out in your story, so many things do, but just that you didn't want to turn 10. Like that's a lot of stuff to unpack. So I think that's amazing that you're unpacking it and taking the time for yourself. I think again, I talk about that all the time. I think it's really necessary. So tell us, Kourtney, about so 23rd, we go for 3 years and she's struggling, right? She's
She's
struggling
struggling.
with a lot. So walk us through what ends up happening in 2016. I lost my brother right before
It,
Thanksgiving.
yeah.
What
It,
what
hers was the
what
Sunday
day?
after Thanksgiving.
The Sunday, oh my god, we're days apart, that's
Yeah.
wild. Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
walk us through what this was like. Did something significant happen where she just took a turn, or it must have been a rough 3 years?
It was. I will say there was one really cool thing is I met my business partner and in 2015,
Mhm.
and she was showing an eye gaze device and talking about what was possible, and I walked up to her at her break and I said, "Hi." I said, "I have two questions for you." And she said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "Is it too late for my sister?" And she goes, "How old is she?" And I said, "She's 48." And she goes, "It's never too late." And I said, "Okay." And then she said, "What's the second question?" I said, "How do I get to be you when I grow up?" And the funny thing is now I'm her business partner. We do, but I got to actually use a device, Toby, with my sister at the age of 50 and got to hear my sister talk with her eyes. I got to hear my sister say, "I love you" for the first time, which I always knew my sister loved me, but to hear those words, I cried for 4 hours. I also got to hear my sister tell me off for the first time.
Oh my god, equally cool, equally
It was
cool.
so we trialed the Toby with her when she was 50. Little aside was right before we trialed the Toby, we went on a we my sisters and I went on a sisters trip. We could not take Kristi because unfortunately medical and all that other stuff, it was a mess. It was over her weekend that I would have seen her. So I said, "Hey, I'm not going to be home. I'm going to Arizona with Kathy and Carrie, but I'll see you when I get back." So my sister ended up in the hospital while I was in Arizona. And I got back and I went, "Did you do that on purpose?" Because it was just a one-day thing, and she got this big smile on her face, and I was like, "You little shit." My sister, Carrie, after that, I said, "Okay, we gotta plan a trip." We got to plan a sister's trip for Kristi. So we took her to that next May. We took her to Discovery Cove and swam with the dolphins
Oh
and
my god,
had
that's so
an
cool.
absolutely fabulous time, and it was amazing. Kristi turned 51 in July. I had just gotten the phone call from my business part. That was when things started happening for me. 'Cause this is all intertwined. This is why I'm saying it. I had gotten the call from Rett to come, hey, we want you on board. And so I went to Seattle to participate in a workshop with my business partner in July. And I came back and went to go see Kristi, and nobody had said anything to me, nothing. It was about right after, it was towards the end of July. And I came back and walked into her room, and she was laying in a weird configuration, and she smelled, and I was like, what's going on? So I changed her diaper. Was She still had to wear diapers because of not being able to do things by herself, and her bottom was completely, like, it was, and I was like, what the, and here she had C differential, which I can't even try to explain it, but it is some kind of, anyhow, it was very contagious. Nobody told me that.
I've never
And
heard
it,
of that. Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
and it was I called my mom, what's going on? She goes, oh, what, are you in the room? I'm like, yeah. She's like, you shouldn't be in there. It's contagious. I was like, oh, great. Thanks. Okay. But that slowly started a cycle of, she broke her finger falling out of bed,
Yikes.
and she had to have surgery, which then led to the C. diff, which then she started having, it just became the cycle of, she would get a little bit better and then she would not feel good. And by, let's see, that was the end of July, I started back to school, was barely functioning because I didn't know what was going on with my sister. And then I think it was September, end of September, she went into the hospital.
Mm,
And it was, she was, again, her blood pressure was really low. She was not eating. She had gone from 140 pounds to about 130 pounds. She had lost like 18 pounds in a matter of a month. Wasn't eating, wasn't doing a lot of things. And she was having, I can't tell you exactly like the exact timeline because I will be very honest, I don't, it was such a shit time. I don't remember a lot of it. She ended up coming home on hospice. That was the only way that the home would take her back because, and honestly, I knew at that point, like when I was at the hospital with her every day and everything like that, I knew the light wasn't in her eyes. Like it was gone. And so I was trying to deal with that and going, okay, let's just keep her happy. Whereas my mom was, she ate a little bit today. She ate a little bit of watermelon juice, or my mom wasn't ready to deal with it. We go through, me teaching, going over and seeing her literally every minute I possibly can because I'm like, I need to be with her. I was supposed to go to England for work in October. We're at the hospital. She was still in the hospital at this point, and I'm like, I'm not going. And I'm standing on one side of the bed, my sister Carrie's on the other side of the bed, and I'm like, I'm not going. And Kristi opened her eyes and gave me the dirtiest look, like, hell no, you're going. And I was like,
mhm.
and Carrie looked at me, she goes, I think she just told you that you're going. And I was like, I looked at her and I said, if you die while I'm gone, I will come haunt you. I will pull your ass out. Like, we didn't sugarcoat stuff with Kristi. Like, we always
Right.
talk the way, and because I was scared to death, I didn't want her to die alone. So I was like,
I
do not die while I'm gone. So went to England, came back. She was now down to 110 pounds. Like, she had
oh my
lost
gosh.
so much weight. She was not moving. She was not walking whatsoever. She was not doing much of anything. The week of Thanksgiving, we had her in-house planning meeting for the next year. So every year you have to do an in-house plan. Like in school, it's called an IEP, an individual education plan. But once you get into housing, it's a house plan. We had her meeting on Wednesday, and I knew, my mom was like, "Oh, we got a plan for next year and what are her goals going to be and and I'm going, she's not going to be here." So I asked my sister Carrie to FaceTime into the meeting with me. And so that was Wednesday morning, and we went into the meeting Wednesday morning, and I said, "We're talking about end of life." My mom said, "It's not, but no, we got to talk about goals and everything else." And I'm going, and the problem was is I was always the bitch. at the home. I was the one who they wanted to keep my mother happy, so they would tell her all the good things, and I was the one who got all the truth.
Mhm.
So they were like, "Okay, Pat, we can keep that goal in here and we can," when it's about walking again and stuff like that. And I'm going, "Oh my God." So we finished the meeting. My mom goes out to smoke with my stepdad, and the nurse comes trotting up to me. "So we need to talk to you." I said, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Kristi's not doing well." And I'm like, "Did you tell my mom? Why didn't we
Mhm.
talk about this in the meeting?" And they're like, we don't want to upset your mom." And I'm like, "Okay, great." So I get to be the one to upset her. So I walked out and my mom and stepdad are outside smoking. And I said, "Hey, just want to let you know that the nurse came and told me." And they're like, "Mom, you're just being dramatic. Stop it." And I'm like, "Okay." The next day was Thanksgiving. I was at home with my late partner and I get a phone call on Thursday morning from my mom. They found Kristi unresponsive this morning. And I went, "Okay, I'm on my way over." So I drove over, spent Thanksgiving Day at the home with her. She was there, but my sister Carrie called me and she said, "I'm going to fly in tomorrow." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "I'm not flying in for mom. I'm not flying in for Kristi. I'm flying in for you. I'll be there for you because I know this is going to." So I picked up Carrie at the hospital or the airport on Friday morning. And she sent me home Friday night and she said, "Go sleep. You haven't slept much this week. Go sleep." And she goes, "Because I have a feeling we're going to have a long weekend." And I went home and slept, came back on Saturday morning and climbed into bed with my sister and pretty much told everybody to fuck off. And
Mhm.
I climbed into bed with my sister and I didn't move. I laid there with her and just held her hand and talked to her and everything else. Wouldn't even move when the nurses came in. Like I just wouldn't move. I'm like, "You can work around me. Thank you very much." My mom kicked us out of the room on Sunday morning because she wanted to have some time with Kristi by herself. And I said, "Okay, can I have time when we get back?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, not a problem." So we went to Starbucks really quick and got a drink and came back. And I said, "Okay, mom, it's my turn." And she said, "No, it's not. You don't get any time." And I was like, "Okay." And so I crawled back into bed and I grabbed Kristi's hand. And my mom said, "I don't want you there." And I said, "I don't care. That's not your choice. I'm going to hold my sister's hand and I'm going to be there with her." And I did. I held her hand and she passed away on Sunday morning at 10:27 in the morning.
I think you knew too. I think your intuition was just
Yeah.
screaming. Yeah, you knew. Mhm.
I knew she wasn't going, like I told my siblings, I said, "She's not going to be there. She's not going to make it to 2017 with us. If you think differently," because mom was telling them differently. I'm like, "That's not going to happen." So, yeah, so we immediately, because I was in charge, one of the things with Rett syndrome is they're doing a lot of research. And so we had always said that we would donate her brain to Harvard for the brain research, that they have a brain research trust. So I made sure my sister Carrie and I were running around beforehand trying to get all of that done and making sure that we had, because it had to be very specific steps that you had to take. Yeah, my sister's a Harvard. I say she's a Harvard girl now. So I'm like, my sister went to Harvard.
She is. She totally is. I love it. No, and
So
I
yeah,
think those things are super important though, Kourtney, and you've probably heard some of the folks that have come on and shared, but I think when we lose our sibling, if there's ways like my brother was an organ donor, I've had organ donors on before, I've had other folks that are like, yeah, we've donated this and that to help science. I think it's a really beautiful thing and it's such a tragic, awful loss. But then when you know that you're giving back and helping, it can be one of these gifts in such a difficult, horrible
yeah.
thing.
My mom and I's relationship after that was non-existent. She told the hospice nurse that I killed my sister, that I murdered my sister because I took her to Discovery Cove. And according to her, that was when everything started, which it wasn't. It was when she broke her finger. I called my siblings and said, "Okay, she's yours,"
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
promised. When it came time to plan her memorial, my mom didn't let me have anything to do with it. She completely cut me out of it until she needed something. And then she, "Oh, hell, now you can be part of it." So we had a memorial for her right after Christmas. And I don't remember it because I will be very honest, my nephew was feeding me cranberry and vodka the whole time because I couldn't deal. I couldn't deal with the part that my sister was actually gone. And it's one of the hardest things, I think, was everybody expected me to be, because before then, I was like, "I know Kristi, it could happen." And I would always say, when Kristi dies, I will be okay because I will be okay for her, because I know she'll be free of Rett syndrome. And I now realize I was completely gaslighting myself because you know what? I was okay with her. She is free and she is up there and she doesn't have Rett syndrome and she's probably wreaking havoc in heaven because I know my sister well enough. But I did not realize how unokay I was going to be for me. And when people told me that, oh, you should be okay, or she's free of Rett syndrome, I was like, thank you for making me feel like a selfish piece of
Mhm.
crap because I would much rather have my sister here right now. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be, even when you expect it.
Yes, and I'm so sad and heartbroken that you had to go through that, but I'm so glad it's like holding both emotions at the same time. I'm so
Yeah,
glad that you are talking about this
yeah,
because in our as we do a monthly support group and I do TikTok lives and there's just we've done these events now, we're gonna continue to do things to support. And when the siblings that come that have an experience like you where it's anticipatory, like you know your sibling's gonna die one day, and sometimes that anticipatory time is a couple months, sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's years like you. It's all over the place. But what is so difficult is when it actually happens
happens.
because there's just so many in anticipatory loss, there's so many losses and then the loss,
The
and
loss.
you don't really know how you're going to deal with it until it
Right.
actually happens. So I'm so glad that you are sharing that and just being real. Yeah, I had to numb myself. It is what it is, but now
I
here
did.
I am and
Yeah,
I'm doing the work and I do work around Rett syndrome. I think that's amazing, but I
yeah,
think it's really important that we are just super honest about that part of it because I do find that it's when it actually happens, that's a whole other part of the journey because they've
yeah,
been in your life. Again, whether it's been weeks, months, years, however long they've been struggling with whatever feel like we're talking about Rett syndrome today, different mental illnesses, physical illnesses, whatever it is, there's still now this part of it actually did happen. Now
yeah.
what?
Now what? How do I and like I said, she was my person. I never had children because I was taking care of her and doing
Right.
things. So it was one of those things of, "Oh my god, what do I do with my life now?"
Right.
And I was teaching, and to be honest, I've never wanted to be a teacher. It was just kind of something I fell into. So it was really rough for a long time. I always loved teaching. I loved teaching my kids. I didn't love all the other stuff that went with teaching. So once I had lost her, I didn't have any I had patience for my kids. I could handle my kids all day, but adults, I had nothing left to give. And so in 2018, I took a leave. Decided I was going to take some time and figure things out. I was dealing with some other things in my personal life with my partner. And I called Susan, my business partner, and said, "Hey, I'm free if you guys need some extra help," and found my passion again and I started working with my girls and boys. And so have left the school district completely. And now I work with my clients and I get to be part of their world and see little glimpses of Kristi in every single one of them. They'll do something or they'll laugh like her, like yesterday. So her birthday was Monday. And I got on with one of my clients yesterday, and her mom's, "Oh, I got to tell you what she did last week. They have free movies." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "We went to go see the Smurfs." The Christy loved the Smurfs. Like she adored the Smurfs. And my client, she goes, got on her device when we got home that night and told her dad, "Go theater." Was telling her dad that they went to the theater to see the Smurfs. And then we were talking about the Smurfs and she was like, "Blue, blue." And I was like, and it was just like, oh my God, it was like Christy's way of saying, "Hey, sis, I got you." And she does. I went to Iceland in April and there was Smurfs in the coffee shop that I was at.
I
And I was like, "Oh, hi, Christy. Hello."
Mhm.
So,
I totally believe in that. Yep, I think that's so cool. I think that's so cool, and I love that you took some time because I hear this from people all the time too, where they're like, "I wish I would have taken time," or and it's never too early to do it, and it's never too late to do it. I have shared too in my story, like, I ended up leaving my job and went back to work, like, right away. I was like, "Nope, I'm gonna start again," and it caught up with me, and then I ended up having to take another break, and almost the same timeline as you, and then I was like, "Okay." It had to restart my career in some ways, and I'm really glad I did it, and it sounds very similar to your
yeah,
story. Yeah, and it's you come back stronger, but it's I felt like I had to rebuild my life in a lot of ways, and it's not always a bad thing.
I did. And it was interesting because so I left my job working, we're doing all this stuff. I'm just like I'm now. And my partner died in January of 2020. And then my mom
Wow.
died the next day, literally like within 24 hours of each other.
Wow.
And so it was like that. Honestly, that was the moment where everything started. Like I had been numb And it's only been in the past couple of years with dealing with therapy and stuff that I'm really starting to actually grieve my sister and grieve the loss of her and learning how to deal with that loss, because you do numb yourself, or at least I did. I numbed myself for years in dealing with a lot of other things, that it was, I couldn't face the fact that I had lost my sister. I knew she was gone, but I couldn't physically deal with the fact that she was no longer, that I can't go. She used to headbutt kiss. She couldn't kiss with her lips, so she would headbutt you gently. And I'm like, I'm never going to get another headbutt kiss from her. Now, I get headbutt kisses from my clients when I see them, and I love it. It's those kinds of things that I'm like, now I'm starting to grieve those things and letting myself grieve appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, Kourtney, that's something that comes up too, and thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry for the loss of your partner and the loss of your mom, and even when we have a complicated relationship, it's tough. It's loss is
Yeah.
loss, and it's really tough. And I'm sure those losses just brought everything to the surface,
Yeah.
and now you're working through it. And again, what a perfect time for you to be on here and sharing all of this.
Yeah.
I do wanna ask you something, Kourtney, a little bit more going to the clinical thing side of this for
Yes.
just a minute, because 'cause I'm curious, and I meant to ask this earlier, but I'm curious with Rett syndrome, is there a way now, or maybe they're working on this is just the analytical part of me, is there a way to detect earlier now? Are they working on things? I know that you were sharing earlier in the episode that there's medication coming out or it's out and they're testing it on helping, but are there ways to detect? Why is it more prevalent in women? I'd love for you to touch on that, before
Okay.
we come to a close. That'd be awesome. Yeah.
I'm not great at the science part of it, but I can explain it a little bit. So
That
the reason it's on more predominant in females is that it is a mutation on the MECP2 gene, which is on the X chromosome. So while we have two X chromosomes as women, one gets shut down and the other one still works for our, and so we have a lot, there's a lot of girls, whereas with boys they only have one X chromosome. So a lot of the times when they get that mutation, they're very severe, or they have very severe issues that resound with it, and so they tend to pass away a lot sooner. Like I said, we now, because of medical technology and stuff, have a lot more boys that are surviving with Rett syndrome. I actually, when I was in England, got to work with a 24-year-old young man with Rett syndrome, and it was amazing. I was like, mind blown. If you, yeah, so that's where that is. There is I could do a test. My sister and I both did a test to see if we were carriers for Rett syndrome. We both, funny enough, got false positives, which we had already knew before then that we weren't going to have children. But like when we got the positives, we were like, oh, hell no. And then they were like, oh, it might be false. There is a test. And then, like I said, they've been doing trials. In May of last year was when Acadia Pharmaceuticals brought in, they started a medication called Daybue that helps with some of the symptoms, which was really cool because, again, I got to go speak at their launch and be a part of their launch of the thing because of my relationship with my sister. I had the president of the company talking on an eye gaze device. I was like, here, why don't you try and see what my kids do? So it's funny because we've talked about it, and somebody, my business partner Susan, asked me, she's, would you have left the school system? Would you have done what you did? Where you're at now if Kristi was still alive? And I know I wouldn't have.
right.
I know I would have, because I would have needed to take care of her and be here for her. And so in a way, I think Kristi was, okay, I've lived, and you're ready to pass on I'm passing the torch on to you. This is what I believe now, is you've got this. You're going to go out, you're going to go show everybody what we're capable and what we can do. And you're going to take everything I taught you, because she taught me literally everything I know, and pass it forward to the girls on their eye to gaze devices, their teams that are working with them. And then on top of it, the siblings on how to do this life with Rett, because you can turn out normal when you have a sibling with Rett syndrome.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So,
I think that's beautiful. I connect with that too, and I just think the work that you're doing is awesome, and I think it's also your story is also a story of finding, and we were chatting about this before we hit record, but finding your purpose out of such
yeah,
pain and out of this lifelong journey that you went on with your sister, because that's all you've known your whole
yeah,
life is that with Kristi. And so taking that, and obviously I connect with that because I had to do something with my pain,
right.
and you are definitely doing something with your pain. So I just really commend you for that. And thank you for sharing your story so openly and Kristi's story. And I know that you guys are going to want to connect with her. So, where are you comfortable with people reaching out to you? Of course, we'll put it in the show notes as well, Kourtney.
You guys can find me on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Facebook as Kourtney Barnum. If you want to email me, my business email is Kourtney@gp2c.org. It's Kourtney with a K. And then if you want to know anything more about Rett syndrome and what we do, you can go to rettuniversity.org and girlpowertocure.org, which is our nonprofit that we work with. So if you want to learn more about Rett syndrome or see our amazing kids and all their awesome stuff, it's all on our social media and on our website.
Okay, perfect. Thank you again, Kourtney. I've loved having you here today. Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.